We are now almost to the end, right? We are on chapter 12. This week is all about nonverbals and interviews. Okay, so again, some of you, this might be the last paper or the last quiz that you have to complete. Just a reminder that for the next chapter, we're going to be skipping chapter 13, not covering the female-male interaction, and we're going to be jumping to the last chapter that we're covering, chapter 14, which is nonverbal communication and intercultural information. So, for this week, we're talking about two overall interview types, right? When we stereotypically think of an interview, we think of a job interview. That is the first type we're going to discuss, and then we're also going to discuss counseling interviews. Given that I do not know a lot about you, although at this point in the semester I know a lot about you more than I did at the beginning of the semester, a lot of you already have jobs, but they're not the careers that you want to go into. So this chapter I chose because it's specifically pertinent to what's going to be going on in your life in the next couple of years. The job interview itself is an incredibly interesting process. When I taught at Michigan State, I also was the internship coordinator for the communication department. So I had huge corporations, 3M, Google, IBM, come in looking for interns for a summer or for an entire year. So what I would do is I would practice with the students. And it was kind of my first glimpse at being the interviewer and watching interviewees. Okay, and I would give students feedback specifically as related to the content that they were talking about, of course, but also to their nonverbal communication. An interview is an incredibly stressful process, and research just kind of goes back and forth on whether or not it's a strong indicator of a candidate's success later on. If you remember back when we talked about the role of the environment, we talked about, or I gave you the example, if you remember this, that companies will often go to people's homes as kind of a glimpse of their true nature, because maybe the job interview doesn't do that, right? I'm sure you've heard of horror stories about different job interviews. This is not an interviewing class, nor is this necessarily an interviewing chapter. What we're looking at specifically is going to be in relation to your nonverbal communication. So we're not talking about the messages that you're saying. There's a number of ways that you can screw up and say something crazy or not be able to answer a question that I would recommend taking the business communication course for, or actually doing practice interviews with someone, which I'm more than willing to do if you ever need anyone's advice or opinion. Please note that you can contact me for that. But the focus of this chapter, obviously as the focus of this class, is going to be on your nonverbal communication. The first thing that you think of when you think of nonverbal in a job interview is going to be your appearance, right? That idea of dressing for success. At this point, if you don't know it already, it hasn't been beat into you, you wear a suit to a job interview. Okay, you wear a dark-colored suit to a job interview. You look professional. You make sure that you look clean. You don't have lots of distracting objects with you. So whether it be this scarf or a huge necklace, right, or hot pink fingernails. Now, of course, it's going to depend on the industry that you go into, but that's kind of the stereotypical big thing that we think about. Okay, so your appearance clearly is important, but there are other aspects that come into play. Overall, when we look at a job interview, we are looking at three big main things. So the chapter starts out talking about that. They talk about this idea of being able to express yourself in a clear and logical fashion. Okay, so can you get to the point? Are you clear? Are you concise? Are you answering the question at play? And sometimes people don't. In fact, a lot of the interviews or mock interviews, I should say, I would do with students, they would kind of, call it beat around the bush, or because they didn't understand the question being asked, they answered it in an incorrect fashion. That says something about you. Okay, I ask for clarification if you don't understand the question, versus just doing the, well, and this is an example of, and, right? Do you see all the nonverbals that went with that? My awkward eyes, my kind of starting to fidget. When we don't understand questions, we tend to display those things, and these are not going to be positive for the nonverbal impression we're making on people. What you also need to consider is adapting your interests or concerns based on the interviewer. So do your research. Know who's interviewing you. Know how many people are interviewing you. And then make sure that you do a little research about them ahead of time. Right? Sometimes people feel like this is that idea of networking. I went to Michigan State, so I might talk about the Spartans and, their success this year in football or whatnot. Okay? But making those connections is really important verbally and also doing it non-verbally. I'm going back to that idea of the nonverbal echo, right? Or mirroring what other people are doing. So if people are looking at you, look at them. If they're sitting close to you, right, leaning close to them. That idea of mirroring the nonverbals of another person. And the last one is demonstrating your mastery over the relevant information. So making sure you do know what you're talking about and then displaying that in a confident fashion. So the textbook talks about, and they give you a chart that summarizes all of this on page 271, but they look at the big things. Overall, you want to come across as being immediate, right? So having high immediacy and also having high nonverbals, right? So a lot of nonverbal communication, not being kind of the statue, just talking with the monotone voice, okay? Just staring, kind of the glazed over look. That's not going to get you anywhere, right? Yes, it's important what you have to say, but it's also important how you say it. So with regard to eye contact, look people in the eyes. Sustain that eye contact. Okay, that's going to communicate that you're assertive, or it's going to communicate that you're confident. It's also going to communicate that you're motivated, right? That you want to get the job done, right? So this overall look at competence. Other things that you want to think about is your voice. Is it expressive? Don't do the monotone aspect. Again, this is where you have to ask for feedback prior to an interview. Okay, making sure that your family and friends say, hey, add a little humor there, a little pitch, change your volume. Again, it allows people to stay engaged in the interaction. Gestures, you want to be able to demonstrate high energy, but be careful. If you are someone similar to me, you could end up jazz hands, dancing all over the place, practically jumping out of your shorts, and that's not going to be positive. So you want to make sure to have gestures, make sure that they are intentional, they are strategic, but at the same time, they're not overwhelming. Make sure you smile. I always tell my public speaking students, they get up there, they get nervous because you are nervous. It's that type of situation, job interview, public speaking. And then they just stand there. Right? And it's very stoic and they never display. And they're talking about something really positive, yet they never smile. Make sure your smile is genuine, right? We're talking about the felt smiles versus the masked smiles. Okay, now sometimes your interviewer will make a little joke and you're like, that's not particularly funny, but you can do a little haha, right? It's better to at least acknowledge that person tried, as it is in the case when you try to make a joke. Your body movement, especially in relation to your head, those nonverbal indications that I understand what's going on, right? So the head nod. Be careful not to turn into the person that's like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and it's going on, and all of a sudden it just looks like you're doing an odd 1980s dance. So be careful. But make sure to use it, indicating that, yes, I'm following the conversation, because often the interview questions are very long. Also, in relation to, this is more connected to the verbal message, but the idea of having few pauses and making sure that it's fluid, so it's not choppy. It feels more like a conversation, as in you know what the answers are. Okay. Most of the time, interviewers will follow some basic interview questions, right? Tell me how you fit with the mission of our organization. Why do you think you would be a good fit? What are your best attributes? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Most of those people aren't really well trained in the interview process, but most people aren't trained in it at all. That is to your advantage. Just making sure that you have done your research, you feel like, you know what, I know what this job entails. I know that I'm the best candidate for it, and communicating that in a very fluid nature is going to indicate that. And then lastly, making sure that you use the standard English. Now, you might use jargon related to your field, but making sure that if you do have a thick accent, right, that you note that or address that based on location, or at the same time that you talk about, why you're using certain word choice if it fits, but again, following that standard English and the standard, accent, Midwestern accent. Also, they talk about this issue of scents, which is an interesting idea because a lot of people don't think about this. We think, let's just make sure that we don't stink. But some people will put on very strong perfume or very strong deodorant. And again, that can be distracting. Is that more positive than coming in and smelling like body odor? Sure. However, a lot of people have allergies and it just comes across as a little bit overwhelming. They'll kind of do the lean back thing. Okay, it's distracting when someone comes in with too much scent. So be careful of that. Now, those are overall the summary. And again, those are summarized on page 271 in a table if you want to go back to reference those. But nothing there that I said should come as a surprise to you given all the different types of nonverbal that we've already discussed through the chapters. The next type of interview is the counseling interview. And some of you may say, well, I've never been to counseling, I hope to never go to counseling, and I'm not a counselor or don't plan on being, so why does this pertain to me? This type of interview, or the way that the chapter presents it, looks at it through the eyes of the interviewer, so being the counselor. And many of us, if not all of us already at this point in our life, have experienced this. While we don't have formal training as a counselor, Okay? As a college professor, I feel sometimes more like a therapist than I do like an academic, in that students will come to me with life problems or issues, and you have to be there to listen and support them, right? As a counselor, we want people to display empathy, right? We want them to be trustworthy. We also want them to be competent in regard to their area of expertise, right? So we know what we're talking about. And I always reframe it when students come and talk to me, and I say, well, from a communication aspect, right? As a communication scholar, this is what I know. I don't know the psychology behind it, right? I don't know, what's going to happen in the socialization portion, but from a communication standpoint, here's what I do know, and I frame it in that fashion, okay? So overall, making sure that you communicate empathy, trust, making sure that you're genuine, right? And they give you an example of a textbook of the psychiatrist where you go to see them in therapy and they write you a prescription, they ship you out the door, right? I'm sure we've all encountered somebody like that. We normally don't go back to talk to that person. And frankly, people are suffering from real things in life, real issues, right? Depression, substance abuse, affairs, real things that are happening, and that idea that we don't care about them, right, is not going to be, is going to come across as disingenuous, right? And they're not going to come back to talk to us again. Okay, we have to be kind to other people, right? So with regard to counselors, they talk about the same type of behaviors, right? Eye contact. You want to make sure to have high levels of eye contact, direct eye contact, recognizing that some people find this to be threatening. So if you are talking to someone who's in need of your services, right, or just, wants a shoulder to cry on or listen to, if they're not looking at you, you want to make sure to look at them to kind of pull them out, right? You'll do kind of the head tilt to say, hey, come back. We're in this conversation. I'm here to support you. But at the same time, recognize that that high level of eye contact can sometimes come across as aggressive, or I'm the authority, you must listen to me. And then that we might not feel like sharing if someone communicates that to us. With regard to body orientation, a direct orientation, okay, leaning forward, indicating that idea of being immediate, right, and inclusive. We want to sit close to another person within about 36 inches. So going back to our distance, right, our intimate distance is that arm stretch. Remember the hula hoop, that idea of close space that's up to 18 inches. So we're not asking people to be in our intimate distance per se, more of that personal space, but relatively close. Again, that communicates, I'm here for you, I care about what you have to say, right? With regard to your head, you want to make sure to be the nodding affirmative and also facing that person. As soon as you turn away from them, it's going to communicate to people that you're not interested. You're looking away, you are distracted. Then the interesting nonverbal that is added to the counseling interview that is not present in the job interview is the issue of touch. Again, we are a touch-weary culture, right? Low contact culture, and touch tends to make us nervous. Stick to, the arm, okay? The hand, the arm, the shoulder are places where most people do not find it to be offensive or inappropriate, okay? Kind of that, my hand's on your hand resting, I'm here for you, I'm concerned. Recognize, though, people might pull away. You need to be able to pick up on those social cues and say, hey, they're pulling away from me, they don't feel comfortable. Remember, these might be people who have been in abuse situations, or might feel depressed, or might have some type of history with regard to touch. So be mindful and be able to pick up on the social cues, but remember the importance of touch. And then it feels good for most people to be recognized, right? I'm here for you, I'm literally here for you. In fact, I am so close, I can touch you. Okay, so be mindful of social cues, but recognize that's important. In a job interview, no touch. A handshake at the beginning of the interview, maybe a handshake at the end, but outside of like a good, pat on the shoulder, even that would be inappropriate for a job interview. So be mindful of that. The last portion of the chapter talks about the idea of bias that is present in an interview, right? Interviewers, as anyone would, right? We have certain prejudices, we have certain stereotypes, we have certain attitudes going into the process. You're already up against all of that, right? People see me and they form an impression immediately about me. And most people don't change. Okay, so if you find me to be annoying from that very first lecture, right, introducing the course, you're probably still finding me to be annoying, right? All of those traits kind of hold through. We hold on to our impressions. So I always say try not to give people more fuel to add to the fire. Okay, recognizing that those prejudices, biases are always going to be present, but realizing that with regard to nonverbal communication, we can control some of those. or at least put our best foot forward. So what I want you to do for this week's paper is actually conduct an interview. And I want you to be the actual interviewer for a job interview. Right? I'm not going to have you do the counseling interview because that topic, is a little bit more sensitive. So what I want you to do is address the 7 different types of nonverbal. Okay, so chapters 2 through chapters 8, and they have listed in the job or in the paper description. And I want you to interview a friend, a family member. Ideally it would be great to interview a stranger, someone that you didn't already have an opinion about, but I want it to be as objective as possible. Okay, so please look at their reactions or their 7 types of nonverbal communication. Holy cow, we must be getting to the end of this class. To address this, so talk about the different types. The questions that you ask are not as important, right? Because I want to see what their nonverbal reactions are. I encourage you to not ask too difficult questions, because if you do, then they might do the whole hesitation, oh crap, I don't know how to answer it. So go with the standard interview questions. I have it set up as just a server, waitress job, at a fine dining restaurant. So it's something that anyone could apply for. It's not I don't want the task to be specific. Look at their nonverbals, write about their nonverbals, and then give me an overall statement of would you hire them or not. Okay, could be based on the content of their answer, it could be based on your overall impression. Try to do it as objectively as possible. Don't just hire them because, oh, they're my friend, I know they're a hard worker, I'm going to do that. What about the interview would cause you to hire them or not hire them? Recognizing, please remember, that everyone makes mistakes. So if they never look at you in the eyes, address that. Is that a reason not to hire someone? For you, right? It might be. I remember you, at some point in your life, are probably going to be interviewing someone for a job if you haven't already. And these things matter. Okay? Something as simple as you've never looked at me, right? Or you said 300 times, or I couldn't understand a word you said, or your very thick accent. These things they make a difference. So if that is your overall conclusion, that you're not going to get graded on whether or not you hire somebody or not, just kind of your overall feedback, right? I will see you next week for the final chapter on intercultural communication. Good luck!